All right, YouTube. Welcome to the channel. As always, welcome to another live stream. I want to get right into tonight's discussion, but before doing that, I have to give a disclaimer. The purpose of tonight's discussion is not to debate Roman Catholic theology versus Protestant theology. There are a surplus of outlets already out there doing that, so we can leave that to those places. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Some have very strong ones at that. But please keep the chat tonight cordial. I really don't want to have to silence people, so just keep it nice. I believe it's important that we have discussions with people who have different views than us, because I think that's where we can learn a lot of things from not just people who think the way that we do, but people in the same stream of ideas that maybe have some drastically different ideas. It's no secret that I am not a Roman Catholic, though I'm sure the charge of being a secret Jesuit will skyrocket after this. But I have discussions with all sorts of people, both online, offline, Protestant, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, atheists, and not every one of those discussions revolves around our disagreements. So believe it or not, we can have friendly discussions about things other than just the things that we differ on. So I've read the book tonight of the authors who I have on the show, and I can tell you that it lifts up the triune God and his gospel. And I consider them to be brothers and sisters alongside me. And so the purpose of tonight's discussion is to hear our guests' experience in the Adventist Church, what caused them to leave, and how they ended up where they currently are. We will save the final portion of the show for audience Q&A as per usual. So as I mentioned, Arthur and Teresa Beem are the authors of the book, It's Okay to Not Be a Seventh-Day Adventist, the doctrine that attempts to repair the temple veil. Arthur is a former third-generation Seventh-day Adventist like myself. He was educated in SDA schools all the way through to university. His father was an SDA teacher for many years, and then an SDA educational superintendent over Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. Pretty good spread there. Was also an ordained or is an ordained minister. For 20 plus years, they lived in an all SDA community and town. Teresa started the first SDA anti-abortion pro-life group. She's spoken in SDA universities and grade schools on abortion, including writing a book on the topic. She started the SDA Children's Church, worked in SDA school, and has written in various SDA publications. With all that said, Arthur, Teresa, thank you so much for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you for
Good to see
inviting
you, Miles.
us.
Yeah, absolutely. I came across your book. I don't know when it was. I actually saw Teresa before even finding your book, so it was actually probably from that. It was an old YouTube video where you were on the EWTN show being interviewed. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I've heard of a single Seventh-day Adventist or former Seventh-day Adventist that became Roman Catholic. Interesting. And I watched it. And that's actually, how I ended up finding your book. Got your book quite some time ago. I left Adventism about 10 years ago. And I probably read that 5 or 6 years after leaving Adventism. So now here you are. Crazy. But first question, other than what I said in the introduction, tell us a little bit about yourselves, who you are, and why you wrote your book.
You go.
Well, that is a very interesting question. Coming from where we came from, especially, my family was steeped in Adventism for so long that even the thought of leaving Adventism at all for anything was not even ever talked about. So we were rather an anomaly that they didn't really know what to do with. They didn't know they still don't know how to take it, really. Yeah, but my father and mother were extremely Orthodox Adventists. So we did the whole entire perfect Friday night to Saturday night, sundown, worship Friday night, went to all the Wednesday night prayer meetings and in gatherings in the fall and all of it, you name it, we did.
His mother made gluten, and every morning was the morning watch.
That's right.
They read out of the morning watch.
Oh yeah, we were the tip of the spear on all the health things before there was any of the vegetarian meats now it was called TVP, and I even forget what it stands for, but it was the first Vegemite. And my dad freaked out. He's like, "Oh, great, meat! I can do meat." And you had to soak it overnight. It was hard as a rock, and it was really funny. But I was raised, most of my childhood was my dad. He was a principal. So he was
SDA school.
a Seventh-Day Adventist principal. He was a teacher before I was born. But once I was born and got into the schools, the Seventh-Day Adventist schools, he was the principal. So my entire education up till high school was my dad being principal.
He was also an ordained minister.
Ordained minister. He was an elder up until the point he was, became an ordained minister. So, not to mention, in the town that we lived in for over 20 years,
Keene, Texas.
Yeah. The university there has a radio station. Well, my aunt and uncle founded that radio station. So it's like we were just like involved in this town since my dad was 13 or 14. He went off to boarding school there, Seventh-Day Adventist boarding school. So he was steeped in it. He steeped us in it.
They were the legalists.
Very, very orthodox.
Ellen White, absolute down the line.
That's right. That's right.
And I was the opposite. And my parents, we teased. What was it? There were Sadventists, and then there were Gladventists.
Gladventists, yes.
We were the Gladventists because we even though we didn't eat a lot of meat, we did eat it when we went out to eat, which was on Sabbath. We'd go out to eat on Sabbath. Let's see. My parents. Actually, my dad was. He didn't really believe that much in Ellen White. I mean, my mother really did, but my dad didn't. And so he said, he was always telling us, don't be spoon fed. You figure out what is truth on your own and go out and work on finding out what is true. And so, but my dad actually was evangelical in his beliefs. He believed in absolutely justification by faith alone. I mean, he was very, very much into what would be considered mainstream gospel, beliefs. He didn't really push a lot of Adventist stuff, although he kept us in Adventist schools. So we had a difference in our home. And then in an Adventist school, we towed the line because we wanted to, make sure that we didn't get kicked out. But as far as at home, we were very, very liberal.
Gotcha. So let's camp out on that a little bit because that kind of segues nicely in regards to your experience. Arthur, what was you said that your education experience involved your dad pretty closely at school. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. In fact, he was in charge of choosing the textbooks. So, and I didn't know this till after several years in school. So it's like, oh, you picked that out, Dad. A lot of the textbooks were just saturated, I guess would be the best, with Sister White. I mean, he quoted, he would talk about Sister White a lot. And the books that I had, now obviously they may have changed over the years. I don't know how much they are to this day. I think they've changed it a little bit. They don't quote Sister White as much, but the teachings are still in there.
Yeah. We were back in the age when, right as we were in late elementary, early high school, was the kind of transition of Adventists going old school. Right. Every single one of your sins are going to be judged. Very, very orthodox into the new ideas of. Right. We're kind of evangelical, you know what I mean? We were there in that transition where we saw the old versus the new, and he got to see the old a lot more than I did.
Right. You would have, like, for instance, coming up through the grades, you'd have a textbook on, say, Bible, then you'd have a workbook. All of them really focused on Ellen White. Mm-hmm. They really, really pounded the whole holding the 40-pound Bible up for long periods of time and all these superhuman things that they talk about Ellen White doing were actually in the textbooks. And they would have, pencil drawings of her doing this. And, they really focused on that. And, of course, all her main teachings were what's the correct verbiage? We're all through everything.
Yeah.
It's like none of the gospel was left alone to itself.
Yep.
Unto itself. There was always the Ellen White version, the Ellen White twist to it. So that was me. So, I would be at school early and late because Dad had to open the door and everything. So our whole focus in life was the church. In fact, in one of the towns we lived in Washington State, we were literally next door to the church, like 20 feet. You could almost touch the church. So, I mean, anything happened at the church, we were there forever.
Was it like a parsonage?
It felt like it could have been at one time because it was so close. It's like, why would anybody live that close to the church unless it was a parsonage,
Right.
So, yeah.
Which Arthur is very different. Most kids, he was not just a TK, he was a PK too. And, the reputation didn't work with his family. All four of the kids stayed in Adventism and they were very respectful towards the Adventist Church, but their faith was very, I would say, shallow.
Yeah,
all the kids had shallow faith, but they still acted, like good
We became
Adventists.
great rule keepers.
Right.
But that's as deep as it went. For me, I got up into middle school, and the thing that bothered me about this whole thing was the questions. I would ask my father questions, and you would think of anybody in the whole world you could ask, it would be him. He's choosing the textbooks. He's a pastor. He's all these things. And I never got any answers. It's just, that's what we do. Why don't we dance, Dad? Why don't we do these things? Why don't we bowl? Why don't we, all the things that Adventists then didn't do and taught against and preached against, never had any answers, And I guess I was not savvy enough as a child to know, to ask, where is it in the Bible that would direct me to do these things you're telling us? Where I see Ellen White has these things, but there was cognitive dissonance going on then that I didn't know how to deal with.
All right.
Yeah.
So I just became a great rule keeper just to stay under the radar.
I would actually say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Arthur was a good rule keeping agnostic because
it's a good way to put it.
He really didn't. When I met him, he kept all the nice, good Adventist rules, but I don't think that there was even I'm not even sure there wasn't, this is how far back we go. There wasn't even the idea of having a relationship with Christ when we were in Adventism.
Right.
That whole idea of, now they push it. I would say that a lot of the kids, probably your age, wouldn't even believe how we were raised. Because Adventism is so different now. As far as the way the kids are, and like I said something about jewelry, but the truth is, a lot of Adventist kids now wear jewelry, but it was unthinkable. I didn't even have a wedding ring, when we got married, because that just would have been super taboo.
What seems to me happened is that all the same rules are still there, because all our family, my family, her family, they're still Adventists. The rules are still there. They just have decided not to do anything with them. So they argue to us that it's like, oh, well, we don't believe that anymore. And we'll ask them, well, are you sure? Well, the church looks down on it, but we don't believe it anymore. Yeah. So it's
classic.
Wait a minute, and
you've interviewed other guys that were saying the same thing. Yeah. You were saying that's experience.
Right.
Yeah, it's the classic. We don't believe that, and then they start defending it.
Right.
It's like, well, if you don't believe it, then why are you now defending the thing that I'm saying? It's almost like that this really is kind of like the unspoken thing. It's funny what you mentioned about, or interesting, I guess I should say, what you said about the textbooks and how that's one of the other big shifts that's taken place. So I'll go through their website sometime when I'm either working on material or just studying or whatever, adventism.org or adventist.org. And that's something that has changed a lot. So folks, you can go onto the Wayback Machine. If you know what the Wayback Machine is, it will take you to previous iterations of websites at certain date points. And so you can use the Wayback Machine and go and see these sorts of changes that have made that they've made on their website. And they used to more frequently cite Ellen White on the website. Now, just like they changed fundamental belief number 18's wording to no longer be a continuing and authoritative source of truth, not that they don't really still believe that. It's just now said to be speaks with prophetic authority. There's more of a out with that language. It's a little bit more loose than direct. And so it's interesting how that has kind of like evolved. And now more and more, you're going to get a lot of Ellen White with no sort of citation made to Ellen White. It's just kind of asserted. So what initially caused you guys, both of you, maybe it was for different reasons, maybe it was for the same reasons, but what caused you to initially start questioning Seventh-Day Adventism?
Yeah, I'll let you start because I know what I'm going to say.
My initial questioning was early, but I didn't realize the questioning was sifting down into my very soul. The questions I had weren't being answered. And so I got into high school, nothing was answered. I get into university there, and still nothing ever was being answered. And you just feel guilty for even thinking about it. I mean, the way their doctrine is set up, if you are questioning it, then you've probably fallen to deception. That's just the basic rule of theirs. And, the interesting person was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. I started to read that, and the Lord used that because when Sherlock Holmes looked at something, he never looks at something on one side. He turns it over. He looks at it. He researches it, and it started to get into my theological mind of it's okay. That's okay to look at something and ask, okay, so why is this? And then I went from that to Mere Christianity and all kinds of Lewis and Tozier, Chesterton, loved Chesterton. And all of them did that same thing. I was like, wait a second, they are very similar to who we think Sherlock Holmes was. When they see something, they're asking questions about it. And it's okay to ask questions about it, which sounds crazy to probably a lot of people nowadays. But it's like when you're raised under that type of thing, myself, is you have to deal with a lot of guilt asking the question in the first place. Can you get over the fact that you're basically sinning because you're asking the question? So those things really, really sparked in my brain. Wait a second, what's going on here? Let me look into this further. So we would take long extended walks and started to do a lot of Bible study research. This
is when we were married.
Early marriage. She had already read the Bible 30 times through. I had never read the Bible through. So by the time we were first married, she had extensive biblical knowledge. And so I started to just pick her brain. Well, her uncle was very into eschatology. And he was kind of an ex-Adventist, not completely, but mostly, which it was strange. And I would go over and talk to him, and it was like, it's okay to ask questions. So that's what opened up my whole entire world to actual study, I can look into history. I can read history now without feeling that the guilt of I've done something to God himself because I asked a question. So those things help crack that shell of guilt, I guess.
Yeah. That's interesting because real quick, if you don't mind, Teresa, I've asked that question actually to other people that have been on this channel who are also former Adventists. Did you ever feel like critical thinking or asking questions was kind of hush-hushed. There was kind of well, we don't talk about that, or we don't ask that. Because I experienced that same exact thing as well, whether it was in grade school, but even up through university. I had a university professor actually pull me outside of class afterward, and I wasn't causing a commotion, folks. I had just been regenerated or born again for like a year and a half. I was just fired up. I was like hungry for the word. And in one of these classes, I was not an Adventist when I attended Adventist University, kind of saw it as like a mission field in a sense. But I was asking questions that we're not supposed to ask. And they pulled me to the side afterwards and said, hey, we would appreciate if you wouldn't ask your questions in class, if you would save that afterward and ask that on the side. And when that sort of thing, and when that sort of thing happened, and when that sort of thing happened, no answers were given then either, which gave off the messaging that really we don't want you asking this in front of other people. Because the time that set it off, there was like a 7 to 8 seconds of quiet tension, of no response. And he said, talk to me after class. And never got an answer.
We engaged. We had that same thing.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Teresa, what was it for you?
Yeah.
It's just getting darker and darker here. Like, we didn't realize this room was going to be so dark. So you want to rent on the light while I'm answering? Okay. So now, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
No, you're good. What was the first thing that kind of caused you to start questioning Adventism?
Well, for me, I was just a very, very happy Adventist. I mean, I loved everything about Adventism. The Sabbath was a delight in our house. We were just, I loved everything about it. So when I started hearing my girlfriends were having abortions, that shocked me. One of my friends had an abortion because she was dating a seminary student, SDA seminarian, and she didn't want to ruin his career. And then another time, a Seventh-Day Adventist doctor told my girlfriend he would give her an abortion because she got pregnant outside of marriage. And these girls that I ran into were just devastated. They were, I didn't even really know much about abortion. I was in college at the time, and I hadn't really thought about it. And it's not something Adventists spoke much about. And so when I started hearing all this stuff about abortion, I was just thinking, this isn't right. This can't be true. There's no way my Seventh-Day Adventist Church would be all for the fourth commandment and yet completely ignore the seventh. I mean, I just couldn't believe this was actually happening. And so, so sorry. And so that was something that started a little bit of a crack in my view. And so I started the very first Seventh-Day Adventist pro-life group, because this was what I thought. I thought, okay, the Seventh-Day Adventists just don't know this. Nobody knows that this is going on in the Seventh-Day Adventist Church, that the doctors and that Adventist hospitals are doing abortions. Because what I did is I kind of did some research for a couple of years. I called Adventist hospitals. I talked to Adventist doctors. And because the Seventh-Day Adventist Church has a doctrine that says that you have to have your first breath before you become a living soul. So therefore they believed that the baby was maybe alive before he or she was born, but they didn't have their soul, because it was, you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Okay. And that's still in the SDA, a book. If you go in there, it's in there, that a child, the soul is, implanted in the child on its first breath outside the womb. Okay, so this set the foundation for the Adventist theology. And so for 15 years, I was going to change the church. I was like, look, somebody's got people. I just thought if people knew that the Adventist Church was pro-choice and that their Adventist hospitals did abortion, they would all go, everybody would go on fire. Everybody would be like, oh no. For 15 years, I struggled to get even one pastor. I mean, I can tell you what Doug Batchelor told me. We were all over. We went all over. And we spoke to Adventist colleges. We spoke to in elementary schools and churches, and they would tolerate us being there. But even the pastors and the teachers themselves would allow enormous disrespect for me in Seventh-Day Adventist academies when I would speak. It was shocking. And after 15 years, I realized, and the truth was, it was because of Doug Batchelor was the straw that broke the camel's back. And it was not because he's actually pro-life. But when I spoke to him, he made a comment, and I know he was probably kidding, but at that point, it was in 2001. And he said to me, what do you, I said, why aren't you, if you're pro-life, come and fight with me. We need some strong voices. And he looked over and he was just he just teased me. He goes, well, what do you want? Want me to get fired? And then he walked away. And I knew at that point, if I couldn't get the top tiers to even give me the time of day, that this was not something I could, in other words, I felt like I was going to be judged along with Adventists because of the blood on their hands. And I couldn't understand why the church I loved so much just absolutely their eyes glazed over when you talked about abortion. And I said, there's no way you can be a remnant. There's no way you can be the remnant of God. You keep saying that, you keep all the commandments and everybody else keeps all the commandments at one. Well, I'm sorry, Adventists don't hardly keep any of the commandments. They don't even preach them, because how many times in your life, Miles, did you hear any preacher talking about not murdering? Really, an actual zero, or not having an adultery, not committing adultery, or none of the other commandments they ever talk about except for the Sabbath. So they're one commandment, Advent, church. But if they were going to turn their eyes to murdering unborn children, then something was terribly wrong. And then the other thing because I was raised satiated in the gospel, so I didn't really hear when Adventists spoke. I thought it was silly. I just didn't pay attention to it. Nobody believes that. Everybody really does know the gospel. That really wasn't the reality, but that's what I was hoping. But in 2000, the general conference, on the general conference floor, somebody got up and asked, hey, can we change our beliefs as we're part of the remnant? And it was shut down immediately. They said, we are the sole remnant. And those two things, abortion and the sole remnant, were the things that got me to leave. I'd already known I was living a lie, that I was just in there for the Sabbath, that I didn't believe most of and I never had. And I was just a cultural Adventist. But what gave me the push and I loved being cultural Adventist. I mean, you said you had the same experience, that you just loved being, the Sabbath was a wonderful thing. But when I realized they're doing, and Adventist hospitals are not where you go when you want an early abortion. You're not going to spend $2,000 or $3,000 for an abortion for the first 3 months. The Adventist hospitals were doing late term abortions. And so anyway, after 15 years of all this, I was like, I've had it. These people are not of God. This is not the remnant, obviously. And Ellen White is a fraud.
Yeah.
So that was it. And so 2001, I actually wrote out. He left way before I did, but I was the one that said.
Yeah, I left here a long time ago.
Yeah, but I wrote out, because our entire marriage, he hardly went to church with me, and so he had already checked out. But I was the one that I wanted on their book that we're gone. I want my name erased, because your book is the book that's going to be telling who's going to be damned, and because you have you're pushing and butchering children, unborn children. So I didn't want my name on there at all, and he didn't care about that. And I think that's kind of a male-female thing.
Well, I mean, I put my name on the letter.
Well, on the letter, but I'm just saying I was the one that.
But as far right, I was so angry at this point that I was just I checked out.
Yeah.
And she convinced me it is important to have that, be off their records.
Yeah.
And it took 2 tries. They didn't do it the first time.
Yeah, we had to keep it up and keep it up.
Oh yeah.
That's a common thing I've heard from a lot of people because they cook the books. I was just talking to somebody about that today, actually, who was touting the old statistic that the Seventh-Day Adventist movement is the fastest growing movement in the world. They're in more countries than any other group. And we've debunked that, folks, on the show for those that are curious. We've shown the statistics from their own sources. David Trim, who's over the Department essentially of Statistics at the Adventist Church. And they're losing 60% of the people who are coming in year over year. So more than 50% of people who are coming in while they're baptized, essentially what that statistic is saying is that when somebody's baptized, somebody's leaving.
Yeah.
Well, then they make it difficult for you to get your name off the books, and they continue to bolster these numbers. I know they say 22 million on paper, but I'm not buying it. But Teresa, let's camp out on this for a little bit here, because you said a lot of interesting stuff that I haven't gotten into it that much on the channel, not because I disagree, because I wholeheartedly agree. I'm involved in and actually got my start in terms of evangelism outside of abortion clinics. Because I was absolutely disgusted with the fact that this is going on in our country. And so I got heavily involved in that. So this is a sweet spot for me in terms of being very passionate about this. This kind of bleeds over into my covenant theology and covenantal succession and the fact that families are a blessing from God, all that sort of stuff. And so I haven't gotten into this that much on the channel, but I'm going to be. And this is a great way to kind of prime it for a lot of people in the audience who may not know, is the Seventh-Day Adventist Church pro-choice? Because they'll tell you, no. We don't have a dog in the fight. They'll release their abortion statement that they released, recently, and kind of give this plausible deniability statement and say, no, we're not on either side. But are they?
Well, I have to quote the political pundit that said, "Well, I personally am against it. I would never do it." And that's essentially what it works out to. Go ahead.
Well, after 15 years, I've got so many stories, really crazy stories. That in 2019, the GC came out with an official statement that is supposed to look like they're pro-life, and it is much better. It's a much better statement. And so this is what has happened, Miles. They no longer have as many abortions. I don't even know if they do abortions in their hospitals anymore, but what they've done is gone off site, because I have actually spoken to nurses that what they'll do is they will have Adventist doctors and Adventist nurses open up a clinic that is not affiliated with the Adventist Church, but what they do is they refer to that.
Farm them
out. So they farm it out. So yes, okay. How much that's happening? The statistics are very, very difficult to find. But all I can do is take the anecdotal evidence that we've come up with, and that is that this is happening now. I don't know, because even the abortion statement that they brought out allows for certain abortions. And it's got a loophole that is possible to open as so wide you can drive a truck through it. But again, I just don't know anymore. I'm not that involved in it anymore. I know there's a guy named Pro-Life Andrew that you'd have to go to find out the current stuff, because I've only kept up with it, I would say, till the 2010s, and I do know what people have told me since then, and they may be more pro-life in the public, but I don't think anything has changed in Adventists' actual among Adventist culture.
Right. Yeah, this is such an interesting topic with them because, well, I guess this is the case for any belief within their system. Depending on who you talk to, you're going to get, talk to 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
But I think you made an interesting point and an interesting connection. And this is something that I'm going to talk about when I get into more detail about this on the channel, how their theology is what leads to this practice being seen as, well, until a human takes their first breath, they're not really there yet. So is it
That's
really
right.
ending a life? That sort of stuff.
Yeah. Until they're not going to ever really be true life until they change that idea that a soul enters a child upon their first breath. I mean,
Yep.
it's just they don't really mean what they're saying until
Yep.
that is changed.
You mentioned earlier too, you went and talked to Doug Batchelor and he kind of joked about, you want me to get fired? My dad's a pastor in the Adventist Church. And I know that, they're not allowed to make a statement because it's seen as political. So because the political realm has latched onto this now, even though, like you mentioned, the Bible's very clear on this, we can't actually state what it says without being somewhat or claimed to be political. Now let's transition to this. How'd you end up Roman Catholic despite everything you were taught in the Remnant Church about Roman Catholicism?
Do you want me to take this? I'll start it and you can.
Sure.
Okay. Once we left Adventism, my thought was, I want to meet every single human that's going to be with me in heaven. I want to go out and I want to really explore. I was so excited to explore all my brothers and sisters in Christ. I wanted to find out what all of them thought. I wanted to love these people I had been taught to be scared of. And so I was just like, I'm never joining another church. I am just going to go out and love everybody. So we made this list of all the different mainstream Christians. Now, we did not add to the list Mormons, even though I've had enough opportunity to talk to Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. But the rest, we're going to go find out. So
one caveat. Catholicism was on the back of the page, kind of scribbled at the bottom, not really serious. It's like, oh, we'll find something before this.
Yeah, we were just convinced that, we're going to be.
We really weren't even serious about it, but we had to put it on the list, to be honest to God.
Yeah.
Okay,
we're good. So I was just having so much fun. I loved it. And I talked to so many pastors. See, he's as a nurse. And so while he was a travel nurse, so when we traveled, we've been traveling for 22 years. And so every single time we would travel to a new part of the United States, I would map out all the different Protestant denominations. And I'd say, okay, we're going to go to this one on Wednesday night. We're going to go to this one on Sunday morning. And we're going to go to this one on Sunday afternoon. 4 to 5 times a week, I was at a different church, learning about the Nazarenes, and and then I would make appointments to talk to the pastors.
Yeah, our research wasn't based in reading their leaflet as you walk in the door. We would get a hold of the pastor directly and sit down with them, and
then we went. I mean, I didn't just go once. I mean, we went over and over and over and over. I wanted to know the people. I wanted to get to know the culture as well as and so we did this for 8 years. And every single time I would go into a different denomination, they would, the pastor, I would say, what makes your church different? Because I've got a Nazarene right here. I've got a Baptist. I've got Assemblies of God. Lots of the churches right in rows in America. We tend to do that. We have a church section of town. And so I would just go from one and I said, tell me, what makes you different? And they all answered the same answer. All of them. We're the only ones that really are Bible Christians. Every single one of them. And I would ask, wait a minute. That's what the guy just told me 3 days ago down here. Your next door neighbor. Everybody says that. Every single person. And so what happened was the more and I loved all of them. There's nothing against any of these. They were wonderful, beautiful Christians. But the more the more we got out, the more we started realizing, you know, when we left Adventism, we had been told things about Protestantism and Catholicism that were not true.
Right.
And I got online and I started having debates. Well, I watched debates. I wasn't really, and I would throw in something once in a while. But for 8 years, I was a member of a online Christian group that discussed and debated theology. And so the Catholics in it started saying things. I was just thinking, this is not right. This is not what Catholics believe. This is not. And I would actually download a lot of what they would, we would be typing in, and we would go study it. And so finally, we'd gone through all these different denominations, and we were loving it. After 8 years of this being online with this group, okay, we're going to go try the Catholics, because I want to know if they're telling me the truth. These online people are winning they're winning all the theological arguments, because I know my Bible. I mean, I'm just
After
telling
30
you,
times through the Bible.
at least 30.
You know.
I would say I've read it 40 times. I knew exactly where everything was in the Bible. I knew what it said. So they kept winning. And it really upset me. So we started to go to a Catholic RCIA. And what we realized is that Protestants misrepresent what Catholics believe in the same exact way that Adventists had misrepresented what Protestants believe. We had, and so after studying, you can jump in anytime because I don't want to take up.
Oh no, you're good.
But after immersing ourselves for a long time in Catholicism, because it is a different premise. The premise of Catholicism is different.
Well, the language is
the
too.
language, the premise.
They haven't changed their language for the comfort of anybody. They keep their language, and the problem is when you come into it with Protestant verbiage
or thoughts or even assumptions,
you miss.
And so
you won't understand it.
And so it took us a long time to understand what they were saying.
Right.
And once you get past that, you're, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. That fits more with the Bible. Sorry, I don't mean to start it, but that fits more with the Bible than anything I had ever read before. It was like I could scan everything I knew within minutes of them saying, this is biblical. And I could... that's right.
And for me, that, and you match it up with history. For me, when I started matching those things up, she just said, and with history, and I was like, I'm kind of speechless. I don't know what to say, it just came down to being deep in history changed my whole view of what Adventist and other Protestant groups that we had been in said about Catholicism was not what was reality.
Yeah. So. And all of these different Protestant denominations accentuate different parts of the Bible. They kind of have to ignore other parts because it doesn't fit the narrative. Once you understand the Catholic narrative, it all works. All of it. The Bible falls into this enormously crazy, wonderful theology that you would have never expected. But you can't understand it easily. I mean, it's like learning a different language. It's like learning Chinese. And so you just have to not give up on it. Because
like the Adventists do Revelation and Daniel Revelation. And then they just pick a couple verses here and there, but those verses are just to support the Daniel and Revelation. Mm-hmm. I felt like the rest of the Bible came alive, and you could read it as a continuum instead of a chopped up document. So for me, it was the history and everything we had learned up to this point.
Yeah. So anyway,
it's interesting. Well, it's interesting because, and I get on to Protestant friends. I haven't really as much on this channel. I have some about a lot of not understanding the real issues and the roots. And you see a lot of that in what you're saying. But I even hear it with Protestants. We've talked offline about this before, about how you'll get Protestants, for example, that balk and scoff at the idea of Christ being present in Eucharist.
Right.
Yet they don't understand. If you're claiming to be a Protestant, folks, that's Protestant. The argument was the mode of presence, not that he's not present at all. So there's just been a long distancing, and I've said for quite some time now, I think there needs to be a new term, just because I don't like getting lumped in with a lot of that stuff, because I don't agree with that. When they're balking and scoffing, and well, that's not me. That's not the tradition I'm a part of. But you point out an interesting thing there. So you went to a variety of different Protestant churches. You kind of put the Catholic Church on the back burner, and then absolutely fell in love with what you saw and that experience. How long of a process was that?
That specific one with Catholicism?
Well, just kind of like the process of transitioning out. I know you mentioned it was while you were married, like transitioning out of Adventism to essentially getting to where you were with Roman Catholicism. Because I think a lot of times, like for those of us that left and we're trying to like undo, depending on how deeply seated the beliefs and stuff were, it can kind of take quite a bit of time for people to like process through that sort of stuff.
Yeah, when we first started to do like serious walks and serious debates, how long?
Well, okay, for me, leaving Adventism was crazy long, because I knew in 1989, when I was a part of an abortion conference out at Loma Linda, that they were saying some of the most horrific, the top levels. We were there with the GC people. We're saying some of the most shocking, horrible things I'd ever heard. And so I knew if this church does not become pro-life, I have to leave. I have to leave. And so it took me then 15 years from there. And then it was 2001 when we actually handed in our resume.
And mind you, all this horrible stuff that's being said by them, they enforced a what do they call it? A
gag order. We weren't supposed to tell anybody.
Order. But she just happened to not. Wasn't
right. Well, the first day, everybody made a vow that they would not, an agreement. Everybody stood and raised their hand and said, I refuse. I mean, I will never, ever tell what I've heard this. Well, my babysitter came late, so I ended up coming in after that, so I didn't have to take it.
Praise
so I'm going to I'm telling what they said.
Providence.
Okay, so.
Which I found very strange for something as important as abortion, for them to say, oh, well, we don't want anybody to know we're actually talking about this.
It was incredibly horrible.
Disgusting.
So it was 89 to 2001 when I finally left Adventism. But I knew there was a good chance I was going to have to leave in 89. And then from 2001 to 2008, I was online with this group. They had Jews and Buddhists. I mean, they had the whole spectrum, Orthodox, Catholics, all kinds of different Protestants. And it was an amazing group. They even had a rabbi. So to make sure that the Bible, the Old Testament, wasn't misrepresented. And so anyway, then it was in 2008 that we decided to become Catholic. And so it was an 8-year process. But during that time, we were checking out every single and not really to criticize or anything. We literally did not expect.
No, we were just ravenous at this point. Yeah. We became just ravenous. It was like, hey, wonder what the Baptists think. Hey, one of these guys think. Let's go to church. Let's go do this. Let's do. It was wonderful.
It was wonderful. And so when we became Catholic, it wasn't really rejecting Protestantism in a way. It was just I don't know. How would you? It was.
Well, I would just have to reiterate what I already said, is that after we looked at history, not just the history of the church, but history of the world, in events in the world, we lifted it up to the Lord the whole entire time we're going through RCIA.
Oh, that's their classes to explain
which is,
what Catholicism is.
Yeah.
Initiation.
Yeah, it went over how many months or so?
It was almost a year.
Almost a year. And at the end, it's just like I have to be honest with ourselves. And this is true. I can't deny it. I cannot deny the fit of history when history and God come into logical sequence, I guess you could say.
Well, and I had a dear, oh my word, this guy was a Bible Baptist church. It was Temple Baptist Church in New Bern, North Carolina. This wonderful pastor, Steve Cobb, and he died. But I sat down one time and I just cried. I just said, Steve, I am so happy I would stay in your church forever. This is the most intellectual church. But I said, I need you to come on and explain to these people how Catholicism is wrong, because I'm not able to dismiss these arguments. They keep winning all the arguments through using scripture. And I said, okay, something is very wrong. You need to come on. And I just said, everybody has their tradition. You've got the Calvinist tradition, you've got the Lutheran tradition of how to understand scripture. And I just said, how do you know which tradition is the best? And he goes, well, just go back the furthest. And I looked at him, I said, oh, excuse me, that means I have to be Catholic. And he just looked at me and he just said, well, I think you should become Catholic, because we've been talking for so long. I just couldn't believe it. I could not believe that he told me to become Catholic. And so I presented the arguments to him, and he did not have a good refutation of them. And so anyway, that's one of the things that just there was over and over and over.
And I found it very fascinating. He's probably the best single Protestant speaker I've ever heard in my life.
He was
phenomenal. He was honest, and I think that's why he said what he did. He constantly quoted Catholic theologians all the way back. So, yeah.
So it was an 8-year process. So it was not something obviously done in haste.
No.
Teresa, you've mentioned a number of times, and I think that there is a misconception about this out there. Me and my Catholic friends get into this very frequently in our fun discussions, having cigars and a nice scotch. Yeah. And we talk theology, and we get into talking the church fathers. I read the church fathers, and all that sort of stuff. And I think there's a big misconception out there, and maybe it's anecdotal to some degree, because people have experienced people who maybe haven't been as well versed, but there's kind of a stereotype out there that Catholics don't really believe the Bible. Catholics don't really read the Bible. They're not Bible Christians. And typically what people mean by that is, well, all their theology is extra biblical. It's predominantly coming from tradition. But I think you've pointed out that there's a lot of Catholics out there that are very well versed in the scriptures. There are a lot of honest Catholic Christians out there who have read the Bible, believe the Bible, and love the Bible. So it was nice to hear you say that. Kind of a little bit of a hard pivot here, but we have to get to this. Folks, we are going to do some Q&A after a few more questions, just reminding you about that. But please don't send those through until you are prompted, or they may get lost in the chat. But I want to ask you, is the Roman Catholic Church, now that you're there, seeking to implement a national Sunday law?
You want me to do it?
You can take that one.
Okay. Well, I'll give you the short version. That's totally ridiculous. And I can tell you why. Especially to Adventists. The Adventists, of course, want to believe that. Catholics have gone to Mass every day since the very beginning.
They've had public worship available.
Worship every day, especially Saturday. They went on Saturday. They went every day. They did Mass. So if you were to say that to a Catholic, they wouldn't even really know what you're talking about. They're like, no. Now, here's the thing. Here's the problem. You've got a lot of people out there, like Biden, who thinks he's a Catholic. At least he wants to portray himself as a Catholic. But no, he's not. Now, he may do something on his own under waving the flag of Catholicism. Doesn't mean a thing. Means nothing. He's basically in a lot of problems right now with his own problem with backing abortion the way he does.
Mhm.
You back abortion publicly as a leader, like him as a supposed Catholic, that's a big problem.
You're supposed to be automatically excommunicated. So he's excommunicated himself, even though it hasn't
Right.
been officially done. But
So the Sunday law coming in through somebody, the Catholic Church would never do that. There's no point in there's no point in that.
well, they don't believe in a day of worship.
No.
They believe every
Yeah.
single day. But you see, Adventists conflate the idea of a day of worship and a day of rest. And so even though Catholics no longer keep, quote, a day of rest, they have no such thought. There's no concept of a day of worship. Did you realize, and most people don't know this, because I did the calculations and I actually called the USCCB to find out exactly how many Catholics go to church on the seventh day, because and they said a third of Catholics in the United States go to church on Saturday. And so when you take a third of Catholics, and there's 77 million Catholics in America.
Just in the United States.
Yeah. So let's see, what would that be? A third, 30 something. But anyway, so
it's more than the whole entire.
There are more Catholics in church on the seventh day than there are Adventists, by a whole bunch. And so Adventists need to understand that. Just go open a website, go to a Catholic church, verify what I'm saying.
Yeah, this is a boogeyman they put out there that is just hung because it sounds good. I guess to them it sounds good, but it's it is absolutely meaningless as far as Catholicism is concerned because we don't have a day like that.
So the answer is no. They are they're not seeking to do such a thing. I think it's, and this I kind of harp on this a lot, and you guys have kind of alluded to this as well. And my imploring would be to Protestants to not be afraid of history, to not be afraid of the church fathers, because I think when you have to say, folks, that Ignatius, Justin Martyr, Cyprian, Clement, all these people are heretics. Saint Athanasius the Great is a heretic.
That's right.
I hear these things, and folks, you don't understand who you're criticizing. You don't understand who you're criticizing.
And it matters. It matters.
Yeah.
You would not have a Bible if it weren't for these guys, because these guys are the ones, because, and it wasn't for 300 years, over 300 years, they actually put together, codified for certain what books went into the Bible, because there were a ton of books outside of the books that went into the Bible. And the people who put the Bible together studied Clement and they studied Ignatius. And what did these people say about these books? Because it was their testimony that they said, okay, this was an authentic book by Mark. There was an authentic book by Matthew, because there was a lot of argument. If you look at Athanasius and you look at Jerome, there was a lot of argument as to what books should be put in the Bible. And those were the people that said and authenticated the books that were eventually put in the Bible. So it would be a hard sell to say that these guys were heretics.
Yeah. So the main reason I bring that up too is just to say that this kind of segues into my next question here. And I want to preface with a little something, because I want to do something here. I want to try and steelman the Roman Catholic position, if we could, really quick. And then you confirm for me if this is correct.
Okay.
Sure.
The Adventist Church loves to make this claim. This is central foundational. Ellen White, the whole shebang. Ted Wilson was just talking about this at the GC session, that this is not a conditional prophecy. It will happen. Talking about the Sunday law and the change of the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
So the claim being that Constantine or the papacy, sometimes they conflate them and say Constantine was a pope. He was not. And they'll say that one of those figures changed the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. They will then oftentimes point to Roman Catholic literature and say, see, it's typically some obscure catechism or something that's not even some official teaching document. But sometimes it is. And they will say, see, even they admit it. They say that the Roman Catholic Church changed the Sabbath. The problem with this, Adventists, is that you are then porting into this a bunch of details that Rome is not saying. What Rome means when they say this is that the apostles were Roman Catholics. They were the first Roman Catholics. They instituted Sunday worship. And so because they're laying claim to the church fathers, they are saying, we changed the Sabbath to Sunday, because they're synonymously saying the apostles did this, and the apostles were Roman Catholics. Is this correct?
That's correct.
Yes. And so,
okay, well, and I will add that they didn't just unilaterally say this. They were told by Christ to do this. And in other words, they don't just say that the apostles got together and said, we're going to start worshiping. Because remember, they worship daily. It says in Acts that they went to the temple daily, which was where you worshiped. And it was the breaking of the bread in the homes. But what they decided to do is make a special day. It was not a Sabbath to the early church. And that they would have a day to honor the resurrection.
Well, and let me interject one thing about this. Most Adventists don't even understand what a Sabbath is. Okay, they talk about it as if the Sabbath, that there's only one Sabbath. It's hard to have a conversation with them because they don't understand what a Sabbath was, where it even came from. They don't know the history of Sabbath. So that's difficult.
Well, it's funny because they'll dog on even Protestants. I get it from them all the time. You're appealing to tradition. Sola Scriptura. Sola Scriptura is not that tradition in the church has no authority, folks. Sola Scriptura is that the scripture, the argument is that we only have one infallible source of authority versus multiple infallible sources of authority. That's what the argument was on. It wasn't that tradition serves zero place. So when I argue and have fun banter with my Roman Catholic friends, we're typically arguing the history and the tradition and the claims being made in that area. But we're not just throwing all of that out full sail and saying, well, it's just kind of me and my Bible under the tree. And whatever conclusion we arrive at, well, that's what it must be. No, that's not the way it works. The other reason I bring up the fathers is because what else was I going to say? I was going to say one other thing. You'd mentioned something earlier. Oh, when you read them a lot of times, so I've heard the claim from some Adventists before, those guys hated the Jews. They'll point to people like, Justin and his apologies, or really anything, because he had quite a bit to say about the Sabbath. And what they don't understand is that they were not against Jews. They were against Judaizing.
Right.
So you mentioned earlier going to Mass on Saturdays or having church services on Saturdays. And so they're not Judaizing in doing that. And that's what the fathers were essentially warning against or fighting against, was the idea of Judaizing, not simply going to worship on Saturdays, because that's the big claim too that Ellen's making, is that it's all about, well, and they mock tradition, yet they have a tradition.
Right.
They have a tradition.
Right.
It's from the 19th century. And the tradition they follow is what they call the Sabbath.
Right.
And then say everyone else needs to be doing what we're doing, or you're not actually keeping the Sabbath. Right. So it's an interesting little switcheroo there. We're getting close on time here. I got a couple more questions, and then folks, you can start sending your questions through now. If you'll put a Q at the beginning of that, so I know what is a question for our guests or myself, I guess, that will help me to be able to pull that sort of stuff out of the live chat. I got a question for you though here. I want to read an Ellen White quote, and then I want to get your thoughts on this. Okay. So she says, quote, this is from Evangelism, page 226. She says, quote, not one jot or tittle of this law is to lose its force, but hold its binding claims on every soul to the end of time. When the law of God is made void, when the Christian world is joined to the Catholic and the worldly in making of none effect the commandments of God, then God's chosen people arise to defend the law of Jehovah, obviously talking about themselves being God's chosen people. End quote. Do Roman Catholics and the Roman Catholic institution make no effect of God's commands?
Well, are we going to talk about the Old Covenant commandments? Or are we going to talk about the New Covenant commandments, which Christ elevated? He said, you have heard that you shall not commit adultery. And so that was the Old Covenant commandment. And he didn't even give it enough respect to even say, that's a law. He stood on the Mount of Olives, and it was kind of juxtaposing him coming down on the Mount Sinai, and he elevated them. He said, you have heard it said, you shall not lust after a woman. But I'm sorry, you shall not commit adultery. He says, but I
Mhm.
say. So he's taking authority over everything in the past. Every single shadow, every single bit of the old covenant was pointing to Christ and his bringing in of the new covenant. And so it is not lawless. The new covenant is so far superior than just the Ten Commandments. The Ten
Yep.
Commandments it's like a springboard. It's the lowest common denominator. But when Christ came in, he elevated it. And he not just elevated it, but he fulfilled it. And so
Mhm.
when we hear these things of Adventists say, oh, we make the commandments of nothing. No, Christ is the one. He made it just of the heart. He said to forgive. The three things that are going to last forever, not the 10 commandments, but the three things that are going to last forever are faith, hope, and love. And the 10 commandments don't even talk about any of that. And so we have to understand Christ brought in a new covenant with new commandments. It's based on the order of Melchizedek, and it's very carefully laid out. And if we don't see the beauty of him, it is all through him, Christ being the pinnacle of everything that has ever happened. If we don't see that the Sabbath was talking about Christ, we have missed it all. We have completely missed it. And so if you're going to start looking at the commandments and placing them superior to what Christ said, then we're in big trouble. I'm not even sure that you're a Christian anymore.
Then you're
And
worshiping the shadow. That
Yep.
it speaks
Right.
of the shadow.
Yeah.
You're just a worshiping a shadow.
And so we have to be perfect, and we can only do that if we're totally in Christ, allowing him to be perfect in us, in a sense.
Yeah. I like what the fathers and the reformers pointed back to the same thing as well, kind of showing a lot of Chrysostom in this regard.
Oh, love custom.
The eighth day motif.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to explain this to Adventists, and maybe I just need to work on my presentation. And I'm going to make videos on this at some point. But the eighth day motif is so biblically rich.
Oh,
Yeah.
And it's not rooted in an idea of where's a verse that says X, Y, Z, specifically this. Well, that's not the way we do theology, folks. We look at the whole of the matter. We look
Right.
across the entire narrative of the Bible to see there's something much, well, you pointed to it, Teresa. There's something greater about the Sabbath than the day that they're essentially idolizing as the golden calf. It's about the person. It's about Jesus.
right.
That's what it was about. That's what it pointed to. And the eighth day motif is built upon the idea that the old covenant Sabbath pointed and typified Jesus while being rooted in the old creation.
Mhm.
The new creation has been inaugurated.
That's
Jesus being the first fruits of that.
Right.
That was the day after the seventh day. Thus, they gave it the eighth day motif, because all throughout the Old Testament, you have typology with the number 8 regarding completion or new beginnings, like Noah and his family. There was 8 people. There's a constant thread there. And so Jesus inaugurating the new creation on the 8th day instituted something, the Lord's Day, which is what the apostles and the church fathers were pointing to establish that being the day that essentially we celebrate the resurrection and inauguration of the new creation. That's why we're saying we meet on Sundays. It has nothing to do with the papacy. It has nothing to do
It has
with
nothing to really, in a sense, it has nothing to do with the Sabbath. I mean, there are Sabbath parallels that we can, just like the birth in the new birth in water parallels circumcision.
Yep.
And we've got a whole bunch of those.
It's the doorway into the covenant community.
That's right. And so the Sabbath was like that. Now, the Sabbath was the old covenant pointing to the cross. The Lord's Day is a new creation. It is the symbolizing Christ brought in a whole new world. When a lot of people, Miles, and I'm sure that you've heard a few of the early Christians, writers say this, but they believed that the great stars falling and all these revelation imagery happened when Christ instituted the new covenant.
Yeah.
That it was the stars falling. That meant that the old covenant looked to the stars to find their calendar. You always looked up and to find out when the Sabbath started, to find out when the holy annual Sabbaths were. Now we look to Christ. Those stars fell.
Yeah.
And now it's Christ. We look to Christ to find out our whole calendar. The whole Christian calendar revolves. And I think you're a Reformed, so I think that you do the same thing. We worship. We have a worship schedule around the life of Christ.
Yeah, the liturgical calendar.
Right, the liturgical calendar. And it's so wonderful. And Adventists have missed out on that.
Yeah.
Our whole entire year now is not looking up and to find out where the stars, are aligned and when this, when the harvest is supposed to be. It is all aligned with Christ.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can get very
Amen.
excited about
that. I love that. It was the fathers that really influenced a shift in my eschatology.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it was just so scripturally rich and all this sort of imagery. Because again, coming from an SDA eschatological framework, when I was an Adventist, I thought that's what eschatology was. There were no other ideas out there. That just is what it was. Right. And so my mind was kind of blown coming into the different schools of thought and the different ideas, but you hit it out of the park there. That's exactly what they hinted at. And it all was kind of rooted in this idea of the inauguration of the new creation. So final question before we bring out some questions from the audience. I see them starting to trickle in. Just what's one thing that you'd say to an Adventist who's questioning Adventism that might be thinking about leaving?
That it's okay not to be a Seventh-Day Adventist. So I'm not being funny. That people don't understand the title is very important. It means a lot to a Seventh-Day Adventist. I know it doesn't mean a lot to maybe a Baptist looking at it. It's like, well, of course it's not. But to an Adventist, the built-in fear factor is there. The built-in guilt factor is there. And this is just a simple way to say, it is okay not to be a Seventh-Day Adventist. It's okay to look into to different theologies, to learn what you believe and why you believe it, and how does it fit into history? How does it fit into the historical Bible? How does it, that it's okay. It's okay. Fear not.
Truth can be nuked and it's going to stand there. There is nothing stronger than truth.
Yeah.
Do not fear.
It's the anvil that can wear out any hammer.
Yeah, that's right.
We got our first question here. Question for all three of you. I'll let you all go first and I can kind of cap it off whenever you say what you'd like. How would you explain the little horn in Daniel to an SDA as simply as possible? Oh boy.
That's what I would say. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure I could answer that. I mean, I have not studied the little horn, but I just know that there's a lot of people historically that believe the little horn was about when Christ was alive, and that it really was not. It was fulfillment during the time of Christ. What was it? Antiochus Epiphanes. So that's my best answer. I'm sorry. I wish I had time to go back and study that a little bit better.
So the first thing I would tell them is that you need to understand there are multiple schools of eschatology, because depending on what school of interpretive thought you're going to stick with, that's going to influence your interpretation of this. Second, I would explain to them that eschatology is not a gospel issue. Right. In Adventism, I understand you have to be a premillennial historicist for the whole system to work, because it's an eschatological movement. So the whole system is built on eschatology. The Christian faith is not that way. Eschatology, I know that they think they've cracked every code, symbol, sign, number, etc. But it's a very advanced field of theology. So after saying those two things, I would then explain my position, which is exactly what you just articulated there. And I have a couple of lines of support from this. There's the scriptural arguments, which is going to be a little bit verbose to get into all those with people and showing parallels with Daniel and Ezekiel and those sorts of things. But you can also point to history. You can point to why the Jews celebrate Hanukkah. The Jews celebrate Hanukkah because the defiling of the sanctuary had to do with a literal tabernacle sanctuary here on earth, not some sanctuary in heaven that's going to be defiled when Jesus takes in the sin-laden blood of sinners. It was a literal temple here where the sacrifices, which is what the 2300 evenings and mornings is actually referring to, the twice daily sacrifices being halted because Antiochus Epiphanes goes in, supposedly with a severed pig's head, causing it to become defiled. That happened exactly like Daniel said that it would, and then he was cut off, and then that physical tabernacle was cleansed. So that's why you can read about this in the Maccabean Revolt. There's all sorts of Jewish materials out there that you can read on this too, around the history of Hanukkah. But that's why they celebrate Hanukkah, because the cleansing of the sanctuary had to do with that event, and that's what they're commemorating during Hanukkah.
That would be what I would suggest. I have heard so many different, like you said, there are so many theologians that have different opinions of it, that it is really hard to know which one would be the best. But my best guess, I mean, I'm with you. I think that's probably the clearest.
Yeah.
I can't add anything to that except that not being able to, an Adventist can't read Maccabees, which is very unfortunate. Maccabees.
Yeah, Ellen White loved the Apocrypha.
Yeah. No, wait a minute. Did you hear the newest, and when they dumped a whole bunch of Ellen White's things, kind of underneath, that there is a story. I mean, I heard this out of Loma Linda on the online Loma Linda Sabbath School, where this guy got up and read a quote of Ellen White that was slipped under. They didn't want anybody to hear, but she said the Apocrypha was of God. I couldn't believe it.
And you probably know this, but Catholics refer to it as deuterocanonical.
Yeah, right. It's funny because the big Bible story that you were talking about earlier, that she supposedly held out for 45 minutes or whatever it was, it contains the deuterocanonical books.
Yeah.
So just an interesting insight there. Question: an SDA friend of mine refuses to see and believe that the Adventist organization used to be pro-choice. What can I point her to help her see and understand this?
Well, they didn't used to be pro-choice. They still are pro-choice. It's just they've gotten very, very good at disguising their verbiage so it looks like they're,
I would suggest, and I can't remember his name right now, but in the 2019 GC, they took up the abortion topic, and they changed it from being pro-choice to pro-life, and they admit that they said they had a big problem with the church's view of the unborn child. They admit it. You just have to go onto the Adventist website and see the GC Executive Committee in 2019, and they can talk about it. But also, there's another guy that really follows this. He's a Seventh-Day Adventist. His name is Andrew Michel, and he's got a YouTube channel, and it's called Pro-Life Andrew, and he has got it all documented, just absolutely documented. Have you heard of him before, Miles?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So he really is a fantastic resource. Yeah.
So she would point you to Pro-Life Andrew. And you can just put that in on YouTube, and his channel will pop up.
Yeah.
So
because he shows up, he throws the documents up on the screen and everything.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
Perfect. Question: I'm currently in the Adventist system due to life circumstances and am fully convinced to leave. I'm very weak in doctrinal knowledge. How should I start learning actual Christian doctrine? I'll have something to say, and then I'll pass it to you if you guys don't mind.
Go ahead.
My friend, study church history. You don't need to be afraid of church history, because the thing that you're going to run into coming out of the Adventist system is that you have been fed a bill of lies. You've been read a history that is through the lens of the Great Controversy. I've documented this on the channel plenty of times. For those that are curious, we're not going to get into all that right now. But even history is read through this lens of the Great Controversy theme, where in the Great Controversy, she supposedly is going through the centuries leading up to themselves, trying to write themselves into the story. But it is a very truncated history. So study church history, the real issues, things like the Reformation, all of that sort of stuff, and start asking God to lead you and guide you in truth and see where God leads you.
Well, Miles, I agree with everything you just said, but I have to admit, the more I read scripture, it never fit in with what Adventists said to me.
No.
I could never read Adventist doctrine into scripture. And so I would also say, just start satiating yourself in the word of God,
Yep.
and I mean, really, I used to get up at 5:30 in the morning. I said, Lord, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to find out what you want from me. And don't give it 15 minutes. Get up, spend an hour in scripture, spend a long time in prayer. Make this, it says, oh my word, I'm getting tired. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Do you put the kingdom of God first in your life? It's hard to get up at 5:30 every morning or whatever it is. But I had to get up because the minute it turned 7 o'clock, I would get phone calls constantly. People would interrupt me. People were hungry. The kids, my children were hungry. So I had to make that commitment to God. I am going to put you first above everything. So I had to do it the first thing in the morning because I'd be just too tired at night, and everybody can do their own thing. You know what I'm saying? But I'm just saying, show God you're putting him first, and he is not going to let you down. And like Miles said, do this research in Christian history, and it will blow your mind.
Because once you start doing that, it's like a tandem sort of thing. When you do that, what I mean too, when I say study that, is you're going to, by virtue, have to start getting into scripture. Because what you're going to find is when you study why Saint Athanasius was essentially alone, you're going to find it was a theologically rich divide over these real important foundational things like, is Christ a created being? You're going to learn the foundational, what St. Augustine and a lot of the fathers called the regula fidei. There's a regulation of the Christian faith, that there's a foundation that is foundational to the Christian faith that you can't really waver off of. And so by virtue of studying into that stuff, you're going to get into the real foundational core issues. Arthur, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I would back up even further and say this. Specifically, ask the Lord to lead you before you read a word. Every single time, hit your knees, ask the Lord to lead you, and then do exactly what you two just said, is be steeped in it. I tell you, the first time I ever read the Bible through was with my wife. And it took us a while. It took us a year. But the thing we did was, as we went through it, we would hit things that we'd both be like, wait a minute, I've never heard that before. And she's read it 40 times. And there's still things to this day we read. We know we've read it before, but it's like the Holy Spirit reveals to you. And he doesn't reveal everything to you. Adventists get the concept that, they really grab onto the Holy Spirit will reveal all things to you. Well, that's how they ended up with eschatological ideas that they have. Ask the Lord for guidance. Ask the Lord for guidance, and be willing. Hopefully you have a husband or wife that you can do it with. But if you don't,
Miles, a lot of the ante-Nicene fathers are very difficult reads. I mean, they get into a lot of stuff that, Gnosticism and a lot of this stuff. So it's very hard to just tell them to go read the early church fathers. But is there any that you would specifically throw out that says, okay, read this? Because,
Yes.
I love Tertullian, but he went off, he kind of became a heretic. And so a lot of them get into some of this really different stuff. I would say I love Clement. I mean,
Yeah.
I just absolutely love the letter of Clement, and that is as readable.
Yep.
But so what do you think?
Rick Brannon, he's a Roman Catholic scholar. He has an excellent, I have it, translation of Clement's epistle to the Romans, a number of Irenaeus, a couple things from St. Ignatius, and
well, I think the Polycarp story is pretty cool.
Totally. And I don't remember what else is in there. It's a small little book. I'll actually link to that, folks, in the description box down below. His translation is the best translation I've seen on this in terms of just easy read.
Okay.
It is very, very. Now, you do have to do, and this is the case for any time period that you read, you do need to understand the way they use the language.
Right.
That's a little important. But he does a pretty good job of translating a lot of that stuff over for you. So I'll put that in the description box down below. But you do make a good point. I guess I forget that not everyone is necessarily reading those sorts of things. But another recommendation I'd make, now we're getting closer to like right before the medieval or the turn of the Middle Ages. And I know that some people say very difficult, hard to read, but they also have really good translations of it. And you don't even necessarily have to read it in order. There's rubrics online that you can get of recommendations in the order to read it. But Augustine's City of God.
Oh, that's a hard read too. But I would love to read what you read.
Oh, the Rick Brannon translation? Yeah. So like I said, I'll put the link to that in the description, but then I'll also email you a link to that as well. It's excellent. Excellent. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of it, but that's hard to ponder. But I'm super impressed that you read it. Wow, that's really good.
I haven't read all. I'm in the process right now of reading City of God. I haven't read all of it, but I'm reading it in an order that was recommended by a number of people that I found online. And reading it in that order has been super, super helpful. And I've been reading it in very small pieces. And really kind of trying to process through it, not do like a marathon read.
And you could also start with his confessions, St. Augustine's confessions.
That's the other one.
To read, and it's beautiful. And then also St. Patrick's has a lot of beautiful writing, and I'm trying to think of who else at that time frame.
Yes.
I know Chrysostom is great too.
Yes, his homilies are just like, because his homilies are sermons exegeting the scriptures. So, and they're pretty easy to read. Now that's like an Eastern Father. The reading is a little bit different. But so what we're essentially saying, friend, is read all the church fathers.
There we go.
but no, I'll link to something in the description box that may be of interest to you, Luke. Final question here to all three of you again. Do you think or feel that most SDAs' hearts are hardened beyond repair because they've been shown so much evidence?
Okay, I think evidence against Adventism, and yet they still cling to it. Okay.
Yes.
Mine's probably the shortest answer, but I think for me anyway, it was the truest, is when you base something in fear and guilt, that's one of the strongest ways to keep you from ever looking into anything else, is you base it in fear. But basically growing up, it was, well, you can't do this, or you can't read that, or you can't think this because you'll be deceived. Everything was, well, you don't, the great deception. Oh, you're going to be deceived, Yeah. And it's like, when you are searching the face of the Lord, you, especially if you pray first, you're not going to be deceived. You're going to have understanding, but you pray for that understanding, you work for that understanding, and I don't think they're hard-hearted, but they've been really sold a bill of goods that.
Yeah.
One of the things you said you read the book. There's a story in there about. I worked with a guy. His son was a bomb expert in Vietnam. And they would go into villages, clean the villages out, and then he would set booby traps, reverse booby traps. And he says they got so good that they would bet on how far they could blow. Oh, we'll blow the guy 10 feet that way, or whatever. I mean, they were really, really good at this. So no matter which way you turn, you're going to get blown up. And that's exactly the way their system is set up. You cannot leave without taking shrapnel. I mean, that's it. And so you have to understand it. I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but it's okay not to be a Seventh-day Adventist. It really is. It is okay. It's okay to read the fathers. It's okay to read these things.
Well, and I think it's not just fear, but it's pride, because you are the elite. You are the Navy SEALs of Christianity. And it takes an enormous hit of humility to be able to say, I was wrong. We were wrong. My parents, because it's your authorities. Your authorities told you the wrong stuff. Your authorities, it probably, if you can go back several generations for a lot of us, and it's like we were all that, you have to admit, stupid enough to be, so utterly deceived and soaked in this deception. And that's very difficult. And to leave Adventism was not that hard for Arthur, because he had given up. It was soul destroying for me. I was horrified when I had to leave, because I had just trusted so much my beautiful Christian family, and so it is really difficult.
Yeah.
But to answer the question, no, I don't think it's about their hearts being hardened. I think there are these other reasons that we just said. Most of them that way. I think they're decent people.
Okay, so I would like your perspective on this, because I think you're a young man, and I think you might have a different one.
I'm going to let you guys sign off. I'm going to do my sign off like I do to end us out tonight, and I'll actually give my answer during that time.
Okay.
So let people know where they can find what you guys are doing, your YouTube channel, all that good stuff, and then I'll sign us out for the night.
Go ahead.
Arthur and Teresa Beem, just type in our names, Arthur, Teresa Beem, online, especially on YouTube, and you'll be able to find us. And thank you so much, Miles. We really appreciate your ministry.
Thank you,
God
Miles.
bless
You do a great job. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right, folks. I hope that was beneficial. A little bit something different tonight. If you guys missed the intro, it's no shocker. I'm not a Roman Catholic, but it's important that we have dialogues with people who think differently than we do. And so that's what tonight was really about. I consider them to be brothers and sisters in the Lord, despite whatever sort of adjective you may place at the beginning of their Christian title, because I've read their book, I've talked with them, and maybe I'm wrong on that, but we're not called to be elect detectors, so I'm not going to play that game. But I want to camp out here. This is a good way to sign off tonight on this question. Are Adventist hearts hardened to the truth such that they are beyond being reached? If I thought this, I would not have started my YouTube channel. I've said from day one that my goal with this channel is predominantly twofold. It's to educate Christians, to be able to wade through the theological fog and haze that is Seventh-day Adventism, and equip the body, the wider body of Christ, to be able to reach these people such that more people will be equipped to reach Adventists and understand why we need to be taking the truth to them. If I thought that they were beyond repair, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Furthermore, coming from my theology, I'm a monergist. I'm Reformed. I believe that it's God that saves people. If anyone was beyond repair, it's all of us. SDAs are no different than us, folks. The grace of God was extended to us, and we should be grateful for that, because we're not better than they are. Are you hearing me? We're not better than they are. Your heart was no better than their heart. It's only by the grace of God that you are attached and united to Jesus Christ by faith, the true Christ and his gospel. No, they're not beyond repair. And I'm not chastising you, OT. I'm just putting my heart out there. No, they're not beyond repair, and we can't treat it that way. Seventh-day Adventists are great people. I know that my channel gets into all sorts of theological things, but my channel is about the official organization and their official stated beliefs. It's not about the people. It's not saying all Adventists are terrible people. No, absolutely not. They're great people. Many friends that are still Seventh-day Adventists, family members that are still Seventh-day Adventists. They are caught in the clutches of a deception and cannot see it. Many of them. Yes, you're going to get that loudmouth guy on the internet, which is why I try and put those people in their place and dish it right back to them. Because if you come in kicking the door down, you're going to get that sort of response. But I get emails, folks, weekly from Adventists leaving this thing for a variety of reasons. No, we need to put the pedal to the metal. Now is the time. Now is the time. The internet is the biggest force. The internet and time are the biggest forces working against this movement. Jesus Christ is ruling and reigning. He is a conquering king. He's not up in heaven doing an investigation right now to see who's found worthy of the atoning benefits of his sacrifice to then eventually plead his blood before the Father on behalf of those people. No, he's ruling and reigning right now. Hebrews 8-10. And all of his enemies are being made a footstool. That includes Adventism. Not all Adventists, but Adventism, which is an enemy of the gospel. It's an enemy of Jesus Christ, and it will be put under his feet. In the process of this, we need to be patient with Seventh-day Adventists. You have to understand, this is a massive worldview shift. For those of you that did not come out of this movement, it is very, very difficult. It is very, very hard to unwind all of this. You are taught all these things as though this is just what it is. You don't know any different. And when I was leaving, there was hardly anything out there. So I was a rogue person. And then you get on the internet and who knows what you're going to find. So I know I'm kind of ranting here, but I'm passionate about this. I hear Adventists and stuff say all the time, you don't care about Adventists, you just have an axe to grind. False. And you're not beyond reach. And I know that God is sovereign over salvation. And I know that God has a people that are caught up in the Seventh-day Adventist movement. So I am seeking to be a voice heralding the message in the wilderness in hopes that Christ's sheep that are caught in this movement will hear the voice of the shepherd and come out. And ironically, come out of her, my people. So with that said, thank you guys again for being here tonight. A couple housekeeping things. Thursday, going to be on this channel live discussing investigative judgment, 1844, and the high priestly work of Christ with Anthony Rogers. I am going to be playing devil's advocate during this stream, letting Anthony essentially respond to the common claims, that sort of stuff that you're going to hear regarding the investigative judgment in 1844. I highly suggest checking that out or showing up. Go and click that notification bell on that video to be notified, because it's going to be a very, very, very theologically rich stream that is going to tackle the foundational pillar of this movement, regardless of what they tell you. So that is this Thursday. Next week, I'm still waiting to finalize something up. I have something potentially scheduled. An SDA is going to come onto the platform, and he is going to give us his best presentation for the mark of the beast being going to church on Sundays after a national Sunday law is passed between a threefold union between the American government, apostate Protestantism, and Roman Catholicism. So we will see if he decides that he still wants to show up, but that's kind of what's on the forecast these upcoming weeks. And then a couple weeks after that, we have some other guests that I still need to finalize, but full steam ahead. Yes, we need to be taking the gospel to Seventh-day Adventists. Do not be defeated, and understand that, yes, God is saving a people. And like I always do, I'm going to end the stream, Adventists, with the same thing you send to us. Come out of her, my people.